Voting is a right. It is supposed to be free. And although the ID may be free, what it takes to get the ID is not.
What the primary election means for you.
Next on Black Nouveau.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Milton Dockery.
And I'm Joanne Williams in for Faithe Colas. We're glad you could join us. This week we'll discuss the importance of next Tuesday's primary election.
Adekunlewilson will join us to discuss her book, Celebrating Good Black Men. And we'll hear from local poet, Miss Jazzi.
But first, to close out Women's History Month, we begin a two-part interview with a woman who's made a lot of history herself, Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Our Liddy Collins spoke with her when she was in town to deliver the keynote address at the Milwaukee Times 2012 Black Excellence Awards.
People who have done things that are important and for other people, and sometimes against the odds, sparked praises from Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Praises for those honored recently at the annual Black Excellence Awards.
It's wonderful to celebrate people, and in particular, people who do things at the local level. I'm into people doing things where they are. Some people think you need to go somewhere else to do something, or you need to worry about, the quote, big picture.
And Dr. Berry herself has worked against the odds to rake up a list of first African-American woman to serve as the Chief Education Officer of the United States, a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, first woman to head a research university, numerous honorary degrees, and the list goes on.
But people have to do things where they find themselves.
You're a professor, lawyer, writer. What motivated you to do all of this coming out of what we would say today an at-risk background?
Well, I guess by at risk you mean that I was poor and that I spent some time in an orphanage and had a rather difficult childhood by most people's standards, as which a lot of people do. But I think that there are people who do things and who accomplish things, just whatever background they come from. Not everybody can do that. Some people are more fragile than others. Some people don't thrive on hard times, and others are able to do it. Now, I don't know exactly what made me do all this. I do know my mother used to tell me all the time that I should become more educated than anybody who was in any room I was in. She said, look around you in the room and make sure you're more educated than anybody else, so they can never say that it's not because you're not educated.
Black people have always been interested in education and the power of it, regardless of the different barriers. Dr. Berry sees today's education challenge as what to do about dropouts.
We spend a lot of time in the United States today worrying about kids who are in school and making sure that they're educated so they can go to college. I see nothing wrong with that. But that's not even the major part of the story for the children I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones who aren't at school because they dropped out. It is the dropouts who disproportionately are in prison. It is the dropouts who disproportionately engage in crime. It is the dropouts who get on drugs. It is the dropouts who don't form families. It is the dropouts who perpetuate this idea of inequity and this class divide throughout our country. And so we need to worry more about the people who are not at school, or at least as much as we worry about the ones who are.
Black communities, especially poor ones, find it hard to get the education their children need.
That is why, for example, poor mothers send their kids, when they hear somebody say there's going to be a voucher school or a charter school or something instead of the public school, they think, oh, now I found the place that's really going to help them, and they're going to wear a uniform and everything's going to be fine. They don't know that those schools don't do any better at actually educating their children as the public schools do, because they all have problems and they're all dealing with a set of specific children. The thirst for education and to find good education is what sends people to all these different places looking. It's as if they will try anything.
Dr. Mary Frances Berry said there are things people can do to counter attacks on their communities. One, get informed.
The second thing is to organize. you can't do anything about making social change unless you organize. The third thing is to understand that when something is wrong or you have a goal that you want to achieve that can be achieved by government or by public opinion, you need protest. Nonviolent protest is an essential ingredient of social change.
Celebrating Good Black Men, Granddad, Greats, and Dad is a reflection of the author's multi-generational relationship with men in her family. Dr. E. Adekunlewilson joins us to discuss the book. Dr. Adekunlewilson, welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Doc, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, I guess the straight and best answer is to say the Creator.
Okay, but give me a little more.
Well, for I would say maybe a decade or more, I just seem to always hear in my conscience, if you will, that somebody needed to write something that would help people to realize that African American men are like other races of men, that we have a mixture of the good, the bad, and the in-between. And not this projected model that we usually see profiled of if somebody's done something negative and they're a criminal or a dropout or whatever, that they had to be black. And I would always say, why doesn't someone do something? And I just felt like I was convicted, especially one night.
Now, in this book, you talk about good, strong black men. Talk about that briefly.
Well, to me, a good, strong black man is not a man that feels that he has to be tough and rough and all macho like a lot of people seem to think that is the strong man. A strong black man is one who is doing his best and also trying every day and takes his challenges as something that helps him grow.
Now, Dr. Adekunlewilson, you also mentioned in your book, it's important to pass on from whence we came. Expound on that for me.
We have a strong and I guess what you would call universal supportive background, because we have had to look to the Creator and look to each other to survive and to feel good about ourselves. And that's what I mean when I say from whence we came, because we had that type of a background and love nurturing.
You also talk about faith in education. And one of the things that jumped out at me when I was reading your book or preparing for this interview, you mentioned when your dad got ready to send you off to college, someone mentioned it was a waste. Talk about that.
Well, my father's strongest opposition for sending me away to college were the people at his church. And since my parents were both very strong Christians and involved Christians in, you know, all aspects. He was a deacon. My mom was a mother of the church, and they were both in the choir and taught Sunday school, etc. To hear their parishioners tell them, you know, it's a waste of time and money for you to be sending a black girl away to college to get more education, because all she's going to do is have babies.
I would imagine that was a hell of a motivating factor for you too, wasn't it?
It certainly was.
You also talk about faith in education and the importance of education. Talk about that for me.
Well, the only hope that we really have, if you think about where we have to start, sort of at the bottom, most of us, and we don't have unlimited money, what we have is what God has given us within our being, our spirits and our bodies, etc. So we have to maximize those.
You also talk about the sense that many African Americans have lost that connectedness with family. Elaborate on that for me more, please.
For some reason or other, I guess, since especially in a lot of families, they don't have the mother, the father, and the siblings. They often just have the mother, or they might have the father in some instances. But to have the two of them living in the same house seems to be something not normal and not to be expected.
But you also talk about in your book that extended family too, about grandmama and granddad living right down the street and how they played an important role. So connect all that for me as well.
Well, my grandparents, I had the opportunity to know all four of my grandfathers. I knew my two great-grandfathers and my two grandfathers. So that is very unusual for most people. But that means we lived within almost walking distance of each other. Okay. So I always had someone that I could go to, and they would give me love, I guess you'd say.
In addition to your grandfather and your great-grandfather, you also talk about many other very strong African-American men. For an example, Dr. Bill Cosby, Minister Louis Farrakhan. How did you go about picking the strong men, other than your family, that are represented in the book?
Well, I was fortunate to meet so many of our, would you say, well-known, famous black men. But the main thing that I wanted is someone who had done something very positive and in a broad way for other people beside themselves, and realize that all of us are like one. So the first one that I met and mentioned, I have to say more about, is Paul Robeson. Okay. Because I had a chance to personally meet him in a situation where he was performing and I was the only black in the entire audience. So he came to me during his break to ask where everybody else was.
Briefly, how did that impact you, though?
Oh, it impacted me greatly, because someone that's famous, you don't really expect them to come to you during their break.
If people want more information, how can they go about getting it?
Well, my book is available, as you know, Celebrating Good Black Men, and you can get them at the bookstores. You can also get them at the library, and from myself.
Okay. Dr. Adekunlewilson, thank you for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
My dad loved for me, willed me here. He said all he wanted in the world was a baby girl. He said he prayed hard and partied even harder when August 20th, 1965, I arrived. Born in the middle of a civil rights movement, God knew I had to have some fight in me. So he put that what was right in me, gave me his best part, his heart. No wonder I love so hard. You see, he knew me before I knew myself. Loved me way more than I could ever love myself. I imagine before he checked me out, he checked me over. You see, he knew storms would chase me, try to erase me. He had to be careful where he placed me. I imagine he said, it is my will, place her in the hood. That is where she'll get her survival skills. Give her the gift of words, add some swagger too. I need her to be heard. Go ahead, Satan, take a reserved seat. Watch the show, fool. She gonna use her enemies as a footstool. So go ahead, test her faith. In 1 year, give her father a heart attack. Take her firstborn granddaughter from her. Make her watch his cancer eat away at the woman who taught her to be Jazzi. Go ahead, make it rain. Her heart gonna be bigger than her pain. Make her fight, hold tight to her marriage, only to have him disrespect her, neglect her, and then reject her. Break her into pieces. Watch her come crashing down on the bathroom floor screaming, God, I can't take no more. Make her wish she was dead. She's still gonna remember what her father said. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in this world. Your daddy wanted a girl, but I'm gonna need a soldier. Stand up, tell your story, give me the glory, and I did. I know y'all thought I was done, but I'm gonna place some verbs and some nouns on my tongue, and I'm gonna use this weapon like a loaded gun. I'm gonna use every gift God gave me, not for myself, but so that I can help somebody else. I'm gonna be better than okay, because if it's just okay, it's not age. So go ahead, Satan. Ooh, whisper in my ear. Tell me that the God I serve is phony while he whispers in my other ear. Baby, they just a part of your testimony.
Miss Jazzi, that was a fabulous spoken word performance. How long did it take you to write that piece, and what motivated you on that particular piece?
Well, like all my poetry is always inspired by my life and the things that I go through. So I want to say it's really just my testimony, and I just couldn't have went through all that and not stand up and say, you know, I made it through. So just to being able to testify and say that God brought me through motivated me to write the piece.
So it's kind of like a span of time. That's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
Different experiences you had.
Right, right. Oh, within the course of a year and a half, I want to say. And so I didn't start writing it as it happened. I really didn't begin to write until like the last, like that straw that broke the camel's back,
Okay.
When I began to come out of the storm, so to speak, is when I began writing. And it took me maybe a couple of days to get it all out. And it's kind of like my medicine, my therapy. And once I got it out, I was good.
How long have you been doing poetry and writing poetry?
I've been writing poetry for about 15 years. I've been performing for maybe like 12 or 13 years.
Okay, so writing it longer than you've been doing
Yeah, I've
it.
been a lover of poetry as long as I was able to read. So, yeah.
What jump-started you to become a spoken word artist?
This is going to sound so funny, though, but the movie Love Jones.
Okay.
I went and saw the movie, and I'm like, oh, man, I can do that. And I've always performed, ever since I was a little bitty girl. My mom would have me to talent contests and stuff, so I would sing and dance. But I had kind of got away from that, and when I saw the movie Love Jones and I saw this poet, I was like, oh, I could do that.
You can do this.
And a friend of mine invited me to a poetry set, and I started, going out every Wednesday, doing poetry.
What do you want to do with this talent as a spoken word artist? Can you make a living at it? Do you want movies? You want books? What is it that you ultimately want to do with this fabulous talent?
What I realized over the years is that, God had given me this gift, and what I want to do is give it back. And movies, books, workshops with the young girls is my first love. I would like to get into some of the schools and just kind of inspire and encourage with my stories and helping young people.
So for that little girl, little boy sitting in the back of the classroom, doodling and writing, you're saying
Tell
follow
your
that
story,
passion. Okay.
just like I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some young people may be able to see you in some events that you have coming up. Let's talk about that.
This March 30th, I'll be at UWM with this, I think it's called The Story of Us. They're bringing in a couple of poets, and I'll be performing there. And then my one-woman show, The Gospel According to Miss Jazzi, which I'm so proud of. I put my heart and my soul into this.
You wrote that piece?
I wrote it, yep. I wrote everything, yeah. And it's basically just my story, the triumphs, the loss. It's about identity, love, and family. And yeah, it's my life's work.
Do you think a spoken word artist like yourself, you think Milwaukee is a good ground for it, a good place to jumpstart your career?
I think Milwaukee has some of the best platforms for poetry in this country. We have spoken word venues throughout the city, Poetry Unplugged, who's hosted by Kwame Anton Nixon, Dasha Kelly, who's another phenomenal poet who does a team poetry slams. Oh yeah, definitely Milwaukee is
It's a great spot.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're glad that you're here. We're
Thank
glad
you.
that you joined us in Black Nouveau. You're going to have to come back and do some more of that fantastic work of yours.
Thanks for having me. I had fun.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wisconsin's primary election is next Tuesday. Joining us to talk about the election and what's at stake are my co-hosts for this week and freelance journalist Joanne Williams and Milwaukee Journal Sentinel editorial writer James Causey. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Joanne, you're part of the MPTV family, and you did a package on voter ID. Where are we with voter ID for the primary next week?
Well, they're not going to be able to enforce it as of next week because of the rulings by the judges in the other part of the state and in Madison.
Okay.
The most recent ruling said that it does indeed violate the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin. So it won't be used April 4th.
Okay.
It won't be enforced April 4th. Who's to say what will happen in subsequent elections?
Now, Mr. Causey, you wrote some things on this as well. Where do you stand on this issue?
Right. Voter ID is one of those difficult situations. First of all, I believe all adults in the state of Wisconsin, all adults across the nation should have IDs. But, and I'm not making this a political issue, it's just a safety issue. You know, if you don't have an ID, it's almost impossible to function as an adult in society. You almost need an ID for everything. I hope the same energy is used to get people who do have IDs to the polls.
Yeah. But Mr. Causey, both of you, why is there so much resistance, based on your comments, to this voter ID bill?
Well, you know, voting is a right. You know, everyone has a right to vote. So, you know, anything that imposes on that right or that makes it more difficult, you know, could be seen as a hindrance, especially for people who are poor. But this is where we could take a more proactive approach. I believe churches, social service agencies, nonprofit groups should go out and reach those people who don't have IDs and put IDs in their hands.
In essence, people that those individuals your references are most comfortable with can be much more effective in terms of getting them to get the proper identification.
I think so, but you know, it's up to the adult as well. Okay. I mean, if you don't have an ID, you should seek out ways to get an ID because, you know, voter ID is one thing, but I think you need ID for a whole lot of other issues as well.
Joanne, do you think that this will have an impact on voter turnout?
I would hope not. People who were concerned that they didn't have an ID to use in the April 4th election may now say, yes, I can go vote without having to show an ID. But I think voter turnout will still be larger than expected just because there's been so much attention to this coming primary. And I think people will come out ID or not. Now, the issue still exists, whether you should get an ID. And I agree with you, James. I think everybody should have some form of photo ID for all sorts of purposes. But this particular bill and this particular legislation isn't necessarily the way it should have been handled. There are other ways to do it, but I think eventually we should all get an ID of some sort.
Give me an example of other ways it could have been done.
Well, when it was originally proposed, there was a question about voter fraud. And there wasn't much voter fraud in the state of Wisconsin. And so it was more of a solution in search of a problem. And that's what the people at the Election Commission said. We had so few incidents of voter fraud that it really wasn't necessary. Then there were the questions about the elderly's access to an ID and college students' access to ID, and of course minorities' access to ID. So it got very complicated, something that didn't really necessarily have to get that complicated. But I don't think the voter ID is going to go away. I think we are going to have to get some sort of ID, and it will be used maybe in the elections, by the presidential election. I think we're going to have one.
Mr. Causey, what are the important races we should be watching?
There are going to be several key races. I'm really interested in the Ian Biddle-Hines race. I think that could be very close. Biddle has done a very good job on getting young people revved up and saying it's his time. In that the old guard should step to the side. Hines, on the other hand, has been, you know, a long time server of the public. He's well known. He has name recognition. That may be a really, really tight race. So,
Joanne, briefly, what are the races you think will be eye-catching?
Well, there are a lot of local races. I think that's going to be an interesting race. There's some school board races in some suburbs that will affect people too. But I think the big one is going to be the Republican primary. And I'd be interested to see how many people of color would declare themselves as a Republican and go and vote in that primary.
That's very interesting because you took me to where I needed to be. But has the Republican primary taken on national significance in Wisconsin as of yet?
Oh, yeah, yes. As of, what, yesterday, today? Right after Illinois.
Advertisement is everywhere. So I think I heard $2 million was being spent by Mitt Romney's campaign here. So, yeah, it's going to take off.
Do you really think I know you mentioned it, you think the turnout is going to be heavy, but do you think that the Republican primary will contribute to that turnout next Tuesday?
I think it will be, the people who are intending to vote in it anyway will be coming out. But I think then there will be some people who are going to go vote in it who haven't voted before. I don't know if they'll be declared Republicans or not, but they may go and cast their ballot just to see how the numbers will go differently in Wisconsin. I think after the Illinois primary, now that Wisconsin is the focus, I think people want to get into it too.
Beyond the primary next week, Wisconsin voters are facing recall elections in May and in June. Is there a danger of voter burnout here in the state?
Yes.
Why do you say this?
I think we've heard so much about politics. Wisconsin has been politics since last year when Governor Walker took office and started making some changes. And now we have these races going on, and then we have the recall races, and we're starting to get inundated with national ads for the Republican primary. So I think we're getting a little bit tired of it, but we can't let our attention go.
Okay.
We still have to pay attention. We still have to make some decisions. And it's just that this is a more active year than ever before.
Now, Mr. Causey, briefly, who does this voter burnout favor?
You know what? It doesn't really favor anyone right now, unless we all go out to the polls and vote. I mean, it depends on what voter turnout is. It depends on people who have the right to vote and can vote. They have to get to the polls and vote. If people stay at home and say my vote doesn't count, then it doesn't favor anyone.
Okay. James Causey and Joanne Williams, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Before we close tonight, we'd like to remind you that your vote does matter. Your vote is your voice in our democracy.
Please let your voice be heard. It's not only your right to vote, it's also your responsibility.
And that wraps up this edition of Black Nouveau.
Good night.
Good night, and thanks for watching.